Today on CityCast Madison. Wisconsin has the largest budget surplus in history, more than $7 billion. And this week, Democratic Governor Tony Evers laid out his vision for what to do with that pot of money during his budget address. But that's only half the story. Republicans control the legislature, and they have their own plans with what to do with a record surplus and the next state budget. It's Friday, February 17th. I'm Dylan Brogan, and here's what Madison's talking about. It's Friday, so we're rounding up the news this week for you, and we're going to talk about the state budget this week. Bianca, always nice to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
I don't know what you were doing Wednesday night, but I was tuning into the governor's big budget address. It wasn't everybody?
I was on Twitter, so I was seeing lots of photos from reporters on the Capitol. But yes, obviously, us folks in media pay a lot more attention to that.
That doesn't mean the implications aren't big for everybody.
Absolutely. It's massive.
It's kind of the big Super Bowl of politics, and we kind of knew what the governor was going to propose. He was putting stuff out all week, but a few things surprised me. What were your first reactions after you read about the news?
It just felt like a very heartening speech. I mean, politicians are good at that, but just recognizing the pandemic's impact on everyone in the state, particularly parents and students. It's kind of fun to have a surplus that big. It's like a pretty rosy picture that we have so much money to spend. So it's nice to hear, that local governments across the state are going to be getting funding.
Yeah, there's this record surplus, and that means there's this one-time money where the state gets to actually make some investments in things. And it's not about cutting and tightening budgets. It's about, hey, maybe there's some problems that we can actually address right now. What I think is interesting about this budget thing is, Governor Evers talks a good game, and I love that his brand is boring, and he certainly lived up to that, but it's what to be expected. But he's definitely putting forth some ideas and is hoping that Republicans go along with at least some of it, because what comes next, right? They get to craft their own budget, and they don't have to listen to him.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because listening to him, it didn't come off as boring to me, but maybe it's because stability feels really nice right now. Obviously, all of the opportunities that are coming for people to get the relief that they need feels really exciting. But we know how complicated this process is and how many interests are at stake. I feel like we need someone who is at the Capitol every day to talk to.
We can do that. How about Mitch Schmidt with the Wisconsin State Journal? He's a government reporter. We could give him a buzz.
Great.
Well, hello there, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right to it. So, Wisconsin, record surplus heading into this big budget debate that's happening this year. That's a really good thing for the state. A decade ago, huge changes came to Wisconsin because of budget deficits. Now we're in the opposite situation. Governor Evers says Wisconsin's in the best financial shape it's ever been in. How exactly did that happen?
There's a couple factors at play. We've been going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and the amount of just federal funding that's flooded into the state through that. In addition to that, you've got, additional funding through Medicaid and other components as well, which ultimately sets the stage for this huge pot of one-time money as we start to craft the next 2-year budget. And I think that the term one-time is kind of an important distinction there, because I think both sides, while they've got their individual proposals or plans, it is important for everybody to kind of keep in mind that this is not a reoccurring $7 billion.
Good point to make. And
darn it.
Yes. If only things were this good. And I'm a little mad at Republican Speaker Robin Vos for stealing my joke, but he talked about how Evers' budget address on Wednesday night, what he heard was like what Oprah said back in the day, right? You get a car and you get $1 billion. And I think that's actually not a bad way to frame the argument here. So maybe we just first talk about what are all these cars that Governor Evers is supposedly giving away?
Some of the big ones that the governor has proposed, some of those he's kind of teased leading up to his budget address, 10% income tax cut, primarily geared towards low and middle income earners. That's something that definitely clashes with the Republican proposal for a flat income tax. So we'll see that sort of develop. Increases to K-12 funding. That's always been a big component of the governor's previous budgets. This one bigger than those even. So definitely trying to work some of that surplus funding into the upcoming budget. And then, a lot of other sort of items, big numbers on broadband expansion, mental health, workforce. One that was kind of new that he introduced was this creation of like a paid family leave program. So those are all going to be items that will obviously become talking points in the next several months as we head towards that final document.
And about the family leave proposal that Governor Evers wants, that would be an investment by the state, right, to give parents time off after they have a kid, paid being the key word there. Is there any support for that kind of big, bold policy proposal?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting topic, and I think will be one to keep an eye on in the coming months. We leading up to the November election, which Evers obviously won, there were several Republican candidates, including Tim Michels, who won the primary and then lost in the general, who had said he would sign a paid family leave bill. Obviously, he's not governor currently. Evers has proposed something similar. We're still kind of working on getting all the details on that. It seems like, at least from what we know, the proposal would include a sort of a one-time seed funding to create the program. And then then moving forward, it seems like it would be supplemented through kind of employer-employee contributions, kind of similar to the unemployment benefits program that the state operates. So it seems like it's crafted in a way that would potentially make it sustainable.
And it's different than the federal laws, just in that you can get time off in the federal law, but you don't get paid.
Yeah, right. The basics of it seems like it would offer 12 weeks paid family medical leave. Seems like it would apply to most, if not all, public, private sector employees in the state.
I feel like it's such a signal to the moment that we're having and the pandemic. I'm sure what legislators and the governor is hearing is from people who are really spread thin, like working from all the sorts of things that go into parenting. Just knowing that the pandemic knocked out so many women from the workforce too. There were just lots of hard decisions to be had. And I do think it's interesting that this kind of comes out, right? That this is the first kind of the big topic.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point in that the state, yes, has this big surplus and is in a good financial health, but it doesn't often feel like that. But before we dive any further into the state budget debate, sounds like Bianca is already getting ready for the weekend.
Hey, it's Friday. If you have friends coming over, have a dinner party planned, or just feel like getting fancy this weekend, let me tell you about one of my favorite places, Cork and Bottle. It's the locally owned liquor store on East Johnson near the corner of Johnson and Patterson. And it's by far my favorite go-to spot. I love finding new things there. I just picked up an Icelandic vodka and a tasty herbaceous gin from a local distillery. They've got pretty wines from around the world, funky local beers, and top-shelf agave selections for us tequila fans in the house. If it's unique or obscure, they're probably into it. And honestly, they feel like family to me at this point. Shout out to Gregory, you keep me coming back. And I found out that you can bring your dog. So now all I need is a dog. Cheers.
He's the education governor, right? Former principal, teacher, superintendent?
Yeah. Long resume in education. And I think it was way back in August, before the November election that he had kind of unveiled his increase in K-12 funding plan. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise by any means.
But he talked about internet, increasing access to high-speed internet before that, which is a part of the picture for education and people having access to educational resources online. Right. Access to everything.
Yeah.
Republicans seem to think that there should be some increase for K through 12 education, but where is that debate at? How will schools benefit, you think, when a budget is ultimately passed?
Yes, you're right. I think Republicans have also expressed willingness to increase funding for education. Back when the governor had unveiled his initial proposal for increased spending. It was lower than the number he included in the final budget proposal. But even at that point, Republicans were saying, that's more than we want to spend. Obviously the Republicans have a ton of power in the actual budget writing process. I mean, they're going to be holding the reins for the next several months before it eventually gets back to the governor. And I may be completely wrong, but it seems like one of the areas for kind of that potential quote unquote compromise would be around the topic of increased spending for public schools with some sort of caveat that includes expansion to school choice, which is obviously something that Republicans have been calling for.
The messagings that Republicans have about school choice is people are like, hey, the money follows the student, right? They can take whatever investment the state is giving to the school and they can take it and do whatever they want with it. And Democrats in public schools really worry about that. So where are we at in terms of school choice, and how does that factor into everything?
I think there was an item in the governor's budget that essentially freezes enrollment or tuition to charter schools. So essentially, and he's made that proposal in the past. The governor does not want to see that expand beyond what it is at. But if Republicans are going to kind of play that sort of kind of hardball there and say, well,
yeah, that's their bargaining chip potentially for school funding.
It's really interesting. Wisconsin is one of the special states that actually has public education enshrined in its state constitution. And I feel like Evers trying to focus on making sure we bolster public resources for our public education is huge. GOP Republican Jesse Rodriguez in the press conference afterwards was saying that Republicans that they're going to want to put the student first and prioritize academic achievement. But I feel like it would be hard to argue that the governor's not trying to offer pathways to increase achievement for students.
Well, maybe a good thing to ask you, Mitch, is education funding going to be the big debate moving forward with the Republicans, or is it going to be something else?
To be determined. I think education is definitely going to be a big one. And that was a big one last budget session. I think it's going to come down to, if you really want to boil it down to a couple of major issues, I think education funding, school choice, and then also I think this tax cuts are going to be big. I think that's probably going to be the most dominating one. And I think what's so interesting on that, or what will be, is just how far apart both sides are on that. Because at the end of the day, there has to be something that the governor can sign or will sign.
So Republicans want this, kind of seems pie in the sky, and Evers says he'll veto it. They want flat tax, just basically across the board, right? Everyone gets a cut, and Evers is more targeted in the middle class and working class, and actually raises taxes on high earners, right?
Yeah, yes. I think some of it is kind of through without getting too deep into the weeds, there would be a cap on the manufacturing and agriculture credit. That's a maybe 10-year-old tax credit currently. The argument against that, at least for supporters of that tax credit, is that would hinder, economic development or growth, add taxes to manufacturers and business owners.
Man, our time is too short. What happens next in this budget debate? Because this, the governor's proposal is just the opening salvo, right? Now it's in the hands of the Republicans who run the legislature.
So essentially, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to get an analysis of the governor's budget from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. They're going to kind of detail department by department, what changes, what's the overall financial impact, et cetera, et cetera. From there, the State Budget Committee, which is run Republican majority, will craft what the final budget is going to look like when it goes back to the governor's office.
Can I ask a question about that? Like, how much is the public involved? Because this is just the beginning of the conversation, right?
The governor had held several public listening sessions and collected input from residents leading up to his budget. The Budget Committee is going to do the same. They're going to have hearings, public meetings, probably all over the state is generally the practice. Collecting input from residents on what they want to see. I'm sure they'll get feedback on items in the governor's budget that they support. They'll probably get feedback on items that they're not so fond of, and then from there, we'll start hitting those budget committee meetings, and then we basically just go department by department.
Sounds real
riveting,
real fun, Mitch, and you'll be covering it all. Thank you for doing this reporting. We'll be following it closely, and we just appreciate your time and learning more about what's happening with the state budget. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
That was Bianca Martin and Mitchell Schmidt, state government reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. This podcast is hosted by Bianca Martin and produced by Molly Stentz and me, Dylan Brogan. Music is by Carl Christensen. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos about us? You can also get more news delivered right to your inbox from our friends at Madison Minutes. We'll be back Tuesday morning with more news from around the city. Monday is President's Day. Did you know that? Maybe I should buy a mattress. We're taking the day off, but we'll see you on Tuesday. CityCast out. Whoa.